Hey, Truth Walkers. Welcome to English Story School. Part 1. The question that stops hearts. What would you do if the very moment that the world told you was supposed to be the happiest day of your life felt like a prison cell closing in? Think about it. Every eye on you, every detail polished to perfection, the flowers blooming in the aisle, the scent of roses mixing with candlelight, the music swelling like a heartbeat, the bride waiting, the guests holding their breath for that magical "I do." Yet inside your chest, something different is happening. Your lungs feel heavy, your throat locks, your heart races not with joy, but with panic. And then comes the scream inside, "This isn't me." Most people would bury that voice. Most people would force a smile, hold trembling hands, and go through with it, choosing comfort over truth, choosing fear of judgment over the courage to be real. Because society tells us that saying yes, even when it feels wrong, is better than being seen as weak. But what if it's the other way around? What if the greatest strength lies not in following the script, but in ripping it apart? That's what makes this story different. Because instead of swallowing his fear, instead of hiding behind the veil of expectation, he stood up. He pushed back his chair. He took the longest walk of his life, not toward the altar, but away from it. Out the doors, past the whispers, past the gasps, past the life he was expected to live. And in that one shocking moment, he rewrote everything. It sounds insane, doesn't it? Who walks away from their own wedding? Who dares to challenge the collective voice of hundreds of guests, the expectations of family, the tears of the bride, the traditions of generations? Who is bold or reckless enough to say, "No, this isn't right for me"? But sometimes the bravest act isn't saying yes. It's daring to say no. Let's pause for a second. Because here's the truth. Life will hand you moments where everyone expects you to nod your head, smile politely, and accept the path in front of you. A job offer that doesn't feel right. A relationship that suffocates you. A decision that looks golden on the outside, but feels like chains on the inside. And in those moments, you'll hear the voice, the one that whispers, "This isn't me. This isn't where I belong." That's the voice most people ignore. But the people who become legends, they listen. Better a broken moment than a broken lifetime. That old saying carries more weight than most realize. A broken moment hurts. It's messy. It stings. It invites criticism and gossip. But a broken lifetime? That's worse. That's waking up every day knowing you betrayed yourself, that you traded your truth for acceptance, that you built your life on a lie. And that's what our man refused to do. Picture the scene again. The bride standing there, beautiful but unaware. The guests shifting uncomfortably, unsure what's happening. The music faltering, the whispers rising like waves. And then the silence. The heavy, suffocating silence as he takes his first step toward the exit. Some thought he had lost his mind. Some thought he was cruel. Some thought he would regret it for the rest of his days. But deep inside, where only he could feel it, there was a strange kind of peace. Not joy, not relief, at least not yet, but peace. Because for the first time in years, he chose himself. And here's the kicker. Courage rarely feels like courage in the moment. It feels like fear. It feels like nausea. It feels like your knees trembling and your palms sweating. It feels like everyone's staring at you like you've lost your mind. But later, when the dust settles, when you look back, you realize that was the moment that saved you. That was the moment that turned shame into strength. That was the moment that made you unstoppable. This man's story didn't start with triumph. It didn't start with applause or praise. It started with chaos, with judgment, with shame. And yet, the seed of greatness was planted right there in the soil of rejection and whispers. Because legends aren't born in comfort. They are born in conflict. They are forged in fire. So here's the question that stops hearts. What would you do if the path everyone expected you to walk suddenly felt like a lie? Would you keep walking, smiling, pretending? Or would you dare to stop, to turn, to walk away, knowing the world will not understand? Our man chose the second path. And in doing so, he proved something the world often forgets. Saying no to the wrong life is the first step to saying yes to the right one. He didn't just walk away from a wedding. He walked in a legend. Part 2, the Walk of Fire. The church bells rang loud and proud, each strike echoing like a countdown to destiny. The flowers filled the air with sweetness, petals glowing in the candlelight. Every corner of the hall whispered of celebration, of forever. Guests leaned toward each other, smiling knowingly, whispering about love, loyalty, and the promise of two souls becoming one. But inside him, forever didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a sentence. Heavy, cold, unforgiving. He tried to steady his breath as he walked down the aisle. His palms were slick with sweat, his heartbeat a hammer against his ribs. The room blurred, as if the faces staring at him weren't real people, but painted masks. Each step forward toward the altar felt heavier, like his shoes were chains dragging across the floor. He scanned the crowd, his parents glowing with pride, his friends grinning, the bride radiant in white. Smiles everywhere, but none of them could feel the storm inside him. None of them could hear the voice screaming in his head, "This isn't me. This isn't right. This isn't my life." And then it happened, the step that wasn't taken. He froze. Just a few paces away from the altar, his body stopped obeying. His foot hovered midair, refusing to land. His chest burned with the weight of decision. His throat locked as the silence around him thickened. For a split second, time broke. The music faltered. The smiles dimmed. The bride tilted her head, confusion flashing in her eyes. He turned, slowly, deliberately, as though the whole world had become a stage, and he was the actor who had just forgotten his lines. Only he hadn't forgotten. He had remembered. Remembered that living a lie is worse than enduring the truth. Remembered that forever is too long to wear someone else's mask. And then he walked. One step. Gasps rippled across the room like thunder rolling through the sky. Another step. Whispers cut through the silence, sharp and ruthless. Third step. The bride's tears began to fall, splashing on her white dress like tiny wounds opening. Fourth step. His mother's voice, trembling with disbelief, called his name. Fifth step. Someone hissed, "Coward." Another muttered, "Selfish." But he kept walking. With every stride, the voices grew louder. Accusations hurled like stones. Insane, cruel, shameful. Each word struck his back, but instead of breaking him, they became fuel. Every insult confirmed the truth, that this path wasn't theirs to understand. It was his. The aisle, which only moments ago had been a path to a future he couldn't live, now became a gauntlet of fire. Every step scorched, every gaze burned, every whisper cut. It wasn't just a walk. It was an execution in the court of public opinion. Yet beneath the flames, beneath the storm, something stronger began to rise. Peace. Not joy. Not relief. Not triumph. Not yet. But peace. Because for the first time, he wasn't betraying himself. He reached the doors. He gripped the handle, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes drilling into his back. Behind him, the music had died. The air was heavy with tears, anger, disbelief. For them, this was tragedy. For him, it was liberation. And with one final push, the doors swung open. Sunlight poured in, blinding and warm, a cruel contrast to the cold storm he left behind. The sound of the bells still echoed, but now they felt different. Not a countdown to chains, but a call to freedom. He stepped outside, into the light, into the unknown. The voices behind him didn't stop. Some cried out for him to turn back. Some cursed his name. Some swore he would regret it forever. But none of it mattered, because in that moment, he finally understood what courage really was. Courage is not the absence of fear. His body was still shaking. His heart was still pounding. His mind was still screaming. Fear hadn't vanished. It had multiplied. But courage is the decision that something else matters more. And what mattered more was truth. What mattered more was freedom. What mattered more was refusing to waste a lifetime in the shadow of a lie. Walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The start of something no one else could see yet. The start of a road that wasn't paved with expectations, but with choices. His choices. The world called it shame. He called it survival. They called it madness. He called it clarity. Every step he took away from that hall, away from the music and whispers and tears, was a step into fire. But fire, as the old saying goes, doesn't just burn, it forges. And as he disappeared into the horizon, one thing became clear. This wasn't the story of a man who ran from love. This was the story of a man who ran toward truth. And legends are always born in fire. Part 3. The Storm After the Silence. When he walked out those doors, sunlight may have greeted him, but the world didn't. It didn't cheer, it didn't admire, it crucified. The silence of that hall was only the calm before the storm. Outside, reality hit harder than any stare, any whisper. The moment spread like wildfire. Friends who once toasted to his future now cut his name from their lips. Family raged, pounding fists on tables, calling him reckless, shameless, ungrateful. Neighbors leaned over their gates, whispering in poison-coated voices. Did you hear? He abandoned her at the altar. The story twisted with every telling, turning him from a man into a monster. The headlines soon joined the mob. Coward walks out on bride. A promise broken, a family shamed. Journalists didn't write his truth. They wrote their version of betrayal, one that sold papers and fed gossip. Every time he passed a newsstand, his name stared back at him, branded with disgrace. He couldn't walk down the street without feeling the eyes. They didn't see him as a man. They saw him as a scandal in human form. Mothers pulled their daughters close, whispering warnings. Old friends crossed the road rather than share space with him. And at night, when the world quieted, the whispers didn't fade. They chased him, curling into his ears, echoing the same words. Failure. Coward. Shame. But here's the twist. What destroys most men began to forge him. The storm didn't break him, it baptized him. Instead of hiding, he dug deeper. Instead of drowning in shame, he discovered strength. When the nights were cold and heavy, he didn't curl under the covers. He used them as armor. His pain became his gym. His rage became his trainer. His silence became his laboratory of reinvention. Every insult, he pinned it to his wall, not as reminders of defeat, but as fuel. Words like loser, selfish, heartless burned in black ink above his desk. Each morning, he would wake up, stare at them, and whisper, "Watch me." Rejection stopped being a wound. It became a teacher. Shame stopped being a curse. It became a challenge. Loneliness stopped being emptiness. It became fuel. The nights were his training ground. Long before dawn, while the world slept, he was awake, learning, building, training. His hands blistered from work, his mind sharpened by books, his body hardened by discipline. He began traveling, moving from place to place, learning from masters, strangers, and the streets themselves. He studied those who had also been cast out, the fighters, the dreamers, the rebels who had turned scars into crowns. Fire refines iron, he told himself, and storms sharpen steel. And he was becoming steel. Every place he went, he collected lessons. From a carpenter in a small town, he learned patience, how building something great takes time, cuts, and splinters. From a boxer in a dimly lit gym, he learned resilience, how to stand again after every hit. From an old man selling books on a roadside, he learned perspective, how stories of the fallen often hold the secrets of the strong. He carried these lessons like weapons, sharpening them with each passing day. He fought, not with fists, but with willpower. He built, not just walls of survival, but foundations of purpose. His failures weren't ghosts haunting him anymore. They were bricks stacked one by one, shaping the man he was becoming. Because here's the truth he realized. He hadn't walked away from love. He had walked toward purpose. The world thought he ran because he was afraid. But he wasn't running from, he was running to a life that belonged to him, not to the expectations of others, to a destiny carved by choice, not by chains, to a horizon no one else could see but him. Every insult that hit him became a spark. Every doubt hurled at him became gasoline. And slowly, that fire inside, once small and trembling, grew into an inferno. One night, standing alone beneath the vast sky, he looked up. The stars stretched above him like reminders of how small one moment can be compared to an entire universe. The pain of the wedding day, the shame, the whispers, they were nothing compared to the galaxy of possibilities waiting beyond fear. And in that silence, with no crowd, no music, no applause, he whispered words that burned into his soul. You're not defined by the day you walk away. You're defined by what you walk toward. That sentence became his anthem, his compass, his shield. He carved it into his journals, repeated it during his training, wrote it on walls when his strength faltered, because he knew the world would always remember him for walking away, but he would remember himself for walking forward. That night was the turning point, the moment rejection transformed from a curse into a crown. From then on, he wasn't the man who left a bride. He was the man who chose to live, who chose to fight, who chose to build. And while the storm outside raged on, inside, he had found his fire. Part 4. The Rise of a Legend. Years rolled on. The whispers that once followed him like shadows began to fade, replaced by a roar the world could no longer silence. The man who was once mocked, cursed, and called a coward now stood as a force no one could ignore. It didn't happen overnight. Success never does. His path was carved with blisters, sleepless nights, and relentless sacrifice. But the difference was this: he had purpose, and purpose is the kind of fire that refuses to die out. What began as small, quiet steps soon became thunder. His first venture was modest, a startup built in a cramped room with secondhand furniture, borrowed equipment, and a mind that refused to quit. But what it lacked in resources, it overflowed with vision. He worked as if the world was still laughing at him, and maybe they were. But every laugh only added fuel to his fire. He failed again and again. Deals fell apart. Partners abandoned him. Investors shook their heads. But every no became a brick, every failure a foundation. He didn't crumble. He constructed. Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. He reminded himself, echoing the wisdom of those who had walked similar paths before him. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, things began to shift. That small room expanded into an office. That office grew into a company. The company evolved into an empire. His ventures weren't just businesses. They were movements. Industries he touched transformed. People he mentored rose to greatness. His name, once a punchline, became a headline, this time written with respect. The same newspapers that had branded him a disgrace now printed his photo on their front pages, celebrating his story as one of resilience, courage, and unshakable vision. From runaway groom to global icon, one headline read. The irony wasn't lost on him, and the same people who once spat his name as an insult now lined up to hear him speak. They filled stadiums, packed auditoriums, streamed his talks online. They didn't just come to listen to his business strategies or life lessons. They came to feel the spark of the man who dared to walk away from the wrong life and build the right one. His words weren't polished speeches written by ghostwriters. They were raw, honest, and cut straight to the soul. Don't live for applause, he told them. Live for alignment. Don't marry a dream just because the world approves. Marry the dream that sets your soul on fire. And if you have to walk away to find it, walk away. Walk proud. Every line dripped with the weight of lived truth. Every sentence carried the power of scars turned into strength. And then came the ultimate twist, the bride. For years, the world had pitted her, painted her as the victim of his bold betrayal. People whispered about her heartbreak, her humiliation, her ruined future. But life has a way of revealing truths with time. Years later, in an interview, she was asked about that fateful day, and her answer silenced the room. It was the best thing he could have done, she said softly. Not just for him, but for me too. We weren't right for each other, and deep down I think I knew it. He had the courage to face it when I didn't. That day hurt, but it freed us both. Imagine that. The very woman he left standing at the altar, the one the world thought he destroyed, admitting that his act of defiance was an act of salvation for both of them. That moment wasn't about humiliation anymore. It wasn't about shame. It was about truth. And truth, no matter how painful, always sets people free. By now, he was no longer just successful. He was symbolic. He became a living reminder that the courage to say no can be as powerful as the courage to say yes. That living authentically, even if it costs you everything in the moment, pays back with a life you could never have imagined. He was more than a businessman, more than a speaker. He was a movement. His story spread across continents, inspiring millions who felt trapped in jobs they hated, in relationships that suffocated them, in lives they didn't choose. He gave them permission to be bold, to risk, to walk away from cages disguised as comfort. And people listened, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. First they laugh. He would remind his audiences, his voice rising with conviction. Then they hate, then they ask how you did it. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Those who once laughed at him now studied him, trying to replicate his success. Those who once hated him now quoted him, trying to claim his wisdom. And those who once dismissed him now asked him to guide them. The man who had once been the symbol of disgrace became the face of freedom. The one who was branded a coward became a legend of courage. Because in the end, he hadn't just walked away from a wedding. He had walked straight into history. Part 5. The Legacy of Saying No. His story did not end with wealth, fame, or applause. It began there. Because true legends aren't remembered for what they gain, but for what they give back. And he, the man who once shook the world by walking away, gave back something greater than money, greater than speeches, greater than empires. He gave back permission. Permission to say no. Permission to refuse cages. Permission to live boldly, authentically, without apology. At first, it was just whispers, young dreamers telling his tale in hushed voices, finding courage in the echo of his choice. But soon, those whispers turned into conversations. Conversations became movements, and movements became revolutions. Schools began teaching his story, not as scandal, but as strength. Professors quoted him in lectures on leadership and ethics. His words, etched in ink, appeared in books across the globe. Politicians invoked his courage as an example of standing firm against pressure. Even in churches and temples, his act of defiance was framed as a lesson in truth, the truth of living aligned with your soul. Because the world finally understood, his choice had never been about rejecting a woman, a wedding, or a tradition. His choice had been about rejecting betrayal of the self. He became the mirror in which people saw their own fears. Workers stuck in jobs they hated saw him and thought, if he could walk away, so can I. Lovers trapped in hollow relationships saw him and whispered, maybe I can find the courage too. Artists, entrepreneurs, wanderers, all found in his story a spark that reminded them of something greater than comfort, destiny. Better to walk alone in truth, he would say, than walk together in a lie. And those words became scripture to a generation that was tired of being chained by expectations. He traveled the world, not as a runaway groom, but as a messenger of alignment. His speeches were not polished performances. They were fire. They were confession and conviction rolled into thunder. Crowds erupted when he spoke, not because he entertained them, but because he liberated them. One evening, in a packed arena, a young man stood up during a Q&A. With tears streaming down his face, he confessed he was about to marry someone because his family forced him, but his heart screamed no. The audience held its breath. The man smiled gently, leaned into the microphone, and said, "Then don't walk into a prison dressed as a wedding suit. Say no today, so you can say yes to life tomorrow. You don't live for applause, you live for alignment." The arena exploded in cheers, not just because of the answer, but because of the undeniable truth inside it. He built foundations, funded schools, mentored leaders. But the core of his legacy wasn't charity, it was courage. His life became proof that failure, scandal, rejection, none of these define you. What defines you is whether you choose to betray yourself or protect yourself. And that's why decades later, long after his hair had grayed and his face had carried the lines of battles fought and won, his name was still spoken with reverence. He wasn't remembered for walking away from a bride. He was remembered for walking toward a destiny. History books described him as a pioneer of personal freedom. Biographers painted him as a revolutionary of authenticity. The world called him a legend, not because he followed the rules, but because he broke them when they suffocated him. And what of the people who once mocked him? They too changed. Former critics admitted their judgment had been shallow. Old enemies became allies. Even strangers who had laughed at him in the past admitted his courage forced them to question their own compromises. The very society that once condemned him now celebrated him. But here's the beauty. He didn't need their approval anymore. His validation was never in their applause. It was in his alignment. And so the story lived on, not as gossip, not as scandal, but as a torch passed from his hands to the hands of those who needed light in their own darkness. A torch that burned with one immortal truth. You're not defined by the doors you walk into. You're defined by the doors you refuse to walk through when they lead you away from yourself. So, the next time you stand at a crossroads, whether in love, in work, or in life, remember him. Remember the man who dared to defy a room full of expectations. Remember the man who chose authenticity over applause. Remember the man who walked away from his own wedding and walked straight into legend. Because legends are not made by saying yes to the world. Legends are made by saying no, when no is the only answer that keeps you true. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.